Let me start with one of the comments in reaction to what you just said, which I was thinking about too. It's from Alicia, who says, to have empathy is to recognize your neighbor as your family, your equal. That's why it's so threatening to the state.
Yeah.
That's actually a virtual definition of which we've been living through for the last 50 years. It's called technically neoliberalism. It starts with Reagan and Thatcher. Thatcher saying, denying this. She says, there is no society. There is just you and your self-interest. Okay? So forget everything else. You alone will survive somehow in the ravages of the market, and there's no solidarity. And she made that very explicit, not just your neighbor metaphorically. Recall that her first act back 40 years ago was to move to destroy labor unions. That means to destroy solidarity, to destroy the opportunity for people to get together, to work together, to get ideas together, to understand the world together, and to act with solidarity to achieve the common good. That's the essence of unions, internationally, incidentally. So the first thing to do was destroy that, throw people out as atomized individuals with no society. Actually, Thatcher probably didn't know it, but she was paraphrasing Marx, who was, in the 19th century, mid-19th century, condemned the autocrats of Europe for trying to turn the population into what he called a sack of potatoes. People who are isolated, atomized, don't know their neighbors, don't talk to their neighbors, but somehow are alone facing concentrated power. That was the ideal. That was what so-called neoliberalism has worked towards. It was mirrored in the United States with different words, but the same ideology and the same consequences. Ronald Reagan's inaugural address, 1981, the central line repeated ever since is, government is the problem, not the solution. What does that mean? Government is the one general institution which is somewhat responsive to the population, not very much because it's under too much external control from concentrated power, but at least has some degree of accountability. Well, if you take decisions away from government, they don't disappear. They move somewhere else, to the centers of unaccountable private power. That's where decisions rest. So that's the ideal. What the real definition of neoliberalism is: brutal, ruthless class war. Place power in the centers of unaccountable institutions, and we know how they operate, how they're supposed to operate. It was told right at the same time by Milton Friedman, the economic guru of neoliberalism, that corporations, that's concentrated economic power, have one responsibility: to enrich themselves and nothing else. To become a corporation, become incorporated is a gift from the public. You're given all kind of advantages, but no responsibility comes with that. Just enrich yourself and your management. Now, there's an addendum to Thatcher's prescription, no society, which she certainly knew. For the rich and powerful, there's plenty of society. There's a very rich and complex society that works for them. One, in fact, is the government. when Reagan said government is the problem, he or whoever wrote his speeches for him knew very well that that was nonsense. What they meant is, we want a rich, a powerful, interventionist government which will work in our interest, not in the interests of the general public, not for the common good. So for us, there's rich society, the government, chambers of commerce, trade associations, think tanks, all sorts of rich, complex societies that assist us in carrying out the class war. And you, the victims, the population, you're a sack of potatoes. You don't have any society. You don't have unions. You don't talk to each other. You're just thrown out on the market somehow to survive. If we want to know what's happening, we can go back to Edinburgh and Glasgow in the mid-18th century. One of my kind of fantasies is to be a space traveler and go back to what I can imagine to be my favorite place, a coffee house in Edinburgh where I could intrude and listen in on a conversation between Adam Smith and David Hume, both of whom believed that sympathy with others is the core of our nature. Actually, in one of his two uses of the word invisible hand, only two relevant ones in his writing, Adam Smith argued that if all the wealth of the societies, wealth meant land in those days, so if one rich landowner appropriated all the land for himself, it really wouldn't matter that much, because the society would be egalitarian, because his sympathy with others would lead him to distribute it in an egalitarian manner, because sympathy with others is so fundamental to our nature. He also understood some other things. In another part of that conversation I'd like to have heard, he wrote in 1776 that the masters of mankind, his words, who were at his day the merchants and manufacturers of England, are the principal architects of government policy. They control the government, and they make sure that their own interests are peculiarly attended to, no matter how grievous the fate of others under their attack. That's Thatcher, Reagan, neoliberalism.